Sudan is very interesting. There's a ceasefire. Why? What brought the fighting?
It's about it's multiple factors. We have the historic factor. We have
historic.
Yeah.
And the fighting, is it? When you texted me, I was telling you it looks like a proxy war between America and Russia.
So we have the aspect of the proxy war.
Is it there?
Yeah, it's
That's
there.
one aspect.
That's one aspect. We have the domestic factor, the rivalry between the two armed units.
And that rivalry is existing.
Yeah, existing.
So where is Omar al-Bashir?
Well, I think he was moved from the prison, the Koba prison, when he was attacked by the RSF. So he was moved from the, from the prison to the military hospital.
Which prison? Is he in prison?
Yeah, he was in prison.
In prison by who? The regime?
By the current regime.
I see. For weapons of war crimes?
No, specifically for the coup that brought him to power in 1989.
I see.
He overthrew the elected government of Sadiq al-Mahdi.
Yes, so something like a treason.
Yeah. But then to understand how we got here, you need to look at this.
Yes, take us through.
These are some of the actors involved.
Oh, I see Omar al-Bashir at the
Yeah, Omar al-Bashir.
He's a military Islamist.
Yeah.
All right.
You see, Sudan itself has what you call it. Sudan was born out of an Islamist, revolt. You remember the Mahdi's war against the British and Egyptian forces, Muhammad al-Mahdi. So Islam has always been a part of the fabric of Sudanese political history. And then even at independence.
Muhammad al-Mahdi.
Yeah.
So that's different from the Omar Mukhtar. That was Libya.
That was Libya.
Libya and Italy.
Yeah.
Okay, so this one is Sudan, Egypt.
Sudan, Egypt. You know, Sudan was once part of Egypt.
Yeah.
And then later it was going to be governed by Egypt and Britain. But then Britain had the full control at that time.
Yeah.
But then he resisted and nearly vanquished the British. He killed, I think, General Gordon.
Which year was this?
I think in the 18-somethings.
19th century?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So his grandson.
Whose grandson?
Muhammad al-Mahdi's grandson.
Okay.
Was one of the key figures that led to Sudanese independence. Abdurrahman al-Mahdi. So even in the first independent era, the two major parties had Islamist backing.
Both of them?
Yeah, you had the Ummah party backed by the Mahdi's Ansar movement, and then you have the Democratic Unionist Party, Ibrahim al-Azari, backed by what you call the Khatimiyya Sufi Brotherhood. But there's a difference between the Islamists of Omar al-Bashir and what do you call it, Muhammad al-Mahdi. So you see, by 1989, Hassan al-Turabi, who was popped up by Jafar al-Numairi, he was influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, so he came to Sudan. But failing to penetrate.
But the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt is recent. It's
been in existence for a long time, but they came to power.
Yeah, but they didn't actually get power. They won an election.
They won an election.
They won an election post Mubarak.
Yeah, but they've been the most formidable opposition throughout Egyptian history. From
Sadat?
From Gamal, not even Sadat.
From Gamal. Why were they opposed to Gamal?
Because they believe that Egypt has an Islamic country. Islam should be at the center of governance in Egypt. But then the military equally wanted to protect that so-called secularist, what you call Western-oriented system.
Of course, buoyed by America, the United States.
So, Omar al-Bashir was influenced by Sadiq al-Mahdi, by Hassan Turabi. So Hassan Turabi became the ideologue of the Islamists in Sudan. But then it took Omar al-Bashir's coup d'etat for him to capture power.
In 89?
In 89.
But Sudan was independent in the 60s?
Yeah.
So who was ruling in the 60s until he came?
In the 60s, I think you had the first prime minister. Okay, this is...
No, let's get back to... No,
this is Hassan al-Turabi.
So you want us to go to Hassan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, let's start from independent. Ibrahim Azari was the prime minister.
But so they got independent from Britain?
Yeah,
Sudan?
Yeah, Britain and Egypt, I think 1955.
How Egypt? Which Egypt?
You see, Sudan was an Egyptian territory initially. But along the line, the Egyptian state borrowed so much from Britain, I think, building the Suez Canal.
Yeah.
Was it Farouk Pasha, one of the kings, either Farouk Pasha or Omar Pasha also, was so much indebted. So as part of what do you call it, payment, he had to relinquish control over the Suez Canal to the British and then hand over some Sudan as a joint.
That's what Gamal came to stop, and that's how Gamal became popular. He stopped it for a week.
Yeah, no, he claimed the Suez Canal.
Yes.
But then by 55, Sudan was given independence. But you see, as a jointly governed territory between the British and the Egyptians will have to renounce their claim to Sudan.
Yeah.
So that's how come Egypt was also a factor in Sudanese independence.
So Egypt had to renounce their claim, and then the British had to grant independence. So they started as a British political system, prime ministerial system. Okay.
And then along the line, Jafar al-Numairi plotted a coup, but he was an Islamist. He tried to Islamize Sudan and enforce Sharia law nationwide, including the southern portion, which is Christian dominated, and that led to the first Sudanese civil war. And then when Omar al-Bashir came to power, he also continued with that same trajectory. And that led to the civil war, and then by 2011, the South ceded But when the South ceded, by 2003, you had another combustion in what do you call it? Darfur. And that was how come the RSF progenitor was born, the Janjaweed militia. That morphed into RSF was born. But then,
why were they born? In South Sudan, was there only one political power?
When the South
broke away, under the thumb of Barack Obama, as president of America.
By then, Darfur, there was a rebellion in Darfur.
Darfur is Sudan?
Darfur is in West Sudan, around this portion.
And it's part of South Sudan?
No, it's part of Sudan itself.
Okay, so why must the problem in Darfur affect Southern Sudan in the way they are operating their country as a new country in 2012?
Because when the Southerners were rebelling against what you call it Sudan, they had some allies that were left in the north when they ceded.
Oh, I see. And so those allies were being targeted.
So let's go through this.
All right.
So now, when Omar al-Bashir was outed, he was leading the Islamic Party, National Congress Party, which was a ruling party. But he had his origin as a military and Islamist. And then, what do you call it? To coup-proof, he started losing influence within the military. He was afraid of a coup d'etat. So he empowered, what do you call it, the RSF, Rapid Response Force. So whilst the Sudanese military is seen as a national institution, control most of the firepower, the artillery, the air force, the navy of the republic, because these ones were supposed to shield the regime from coup d'etat, they were, what do you call it, lightly armed. They're more familiar with the pickup technicals, the Toyota or heavily machine guns. So, but then it took, what do you call it, Hemeti involvement for Omar al-Bashir to be overthrown.
Oh, the same group that he was relying on.
Yeah.
So we are looking at it like the 64 Infantry Battalion or Nkrumah's own guard. That group that he had empowered to be the elite in the army to protect him, they overthrew him.
Yeah, they stood down without resisting.
Or when the overthrow came?
When the army intended to overthrow.
Okay. So they didn't fight?
They didn't fight.
Okay, so it was almost bloodless.
Yes. By so doing, he felt he has a stake in power because he allowed the army to overthrow his boss.
Absolutely, he did.
That's the first instance. And I remember when the citizens besieged the army itself in its headquarters.
Yeah.
The massacre on the June 3rd, 2019, was spearheaded by his unit.
Oh, I see. In protection of the military junta.
So he felt that's giving him another second claim.
Yeah.
To whatever privilege that will come to the military. And thirdly, last year, 2021, when Burhan led a coup that dissolved the power sharing agreement between the civilian forces and the government in October. Yeah. It was his unit that was deployed. Again. So he felt he has always been used. And even in Sudan, there is this stereotype that is always attached to the people from Darfur. You see, it is at the fringe, western end of the Sudan. So they can't see them to be Darfuris. So what
does that mean?
As in like
lower citizens?
Yeah,
lower
somehow
level?
Not seen as part of the Sudanese elite.
Because they are near Chad?
Because they are and mostly they are from this nomadic Arab tribe, Rizgate. You get the point. So what happened is that, okay, he felt he's always been used, but he's not getting enough shares in the capital. But inadvertently, the international community, African Union, and by extension United States, equally allowed the coup to happen in the first place.
Oh, it would appear that the coup against Omar al-Bashir.
No, even the coup that dissolved the power sharing agreement.
Yeah, okay. But by then, the United States will seem in control of the contextual politics of Sudan.
See, they had, what do you call it, a leverage against the military.
Who's they?
US, United States.
Against the Sudanese military?
Yeah, and the state. Because under Omar al-Bashir, Sudan was listed as what you call state sponsor of terror.
Yeah.
And that, what do you call it, it prevented investment from coming to the country.
Absolutely, yes. I know a case like that, yes.
But because they wanted Sudan to be to sign the Abraham Accord, the so-called normalization with Israel, and they knew very well that going into election, no Sudanese would ever allow that to happen. So they decided to weaken the civilian part of the alliance. But then let's look at the actors here now.
Okay.
You have the Sudanese military and the RSF, jointly overthrowing Omar al-Bashir. But because there are no institutions, so this became the only institutions. But between these two units, this one is just a militia. The Gallo is not formally educated.
He's not formally educated?
No. He only benefited from his close alliance with Omar al-Bashir. And so to the average Sudanese general, I mean,
he doesn't see how to include.
Just a usurper.
So he cannot include him
by
in
history,
anything.
by his origin from Darfur, and his own, what do you call it, lack of formal training, even as a military officer, there's no way he could sit on the table with them.
I get it.
But then the opposition, we call it have two opposition, the armed opposition and the civilian oppositions. So in the armed oppositions who were fighting Omar al-Bashir regime since 2003 in Darfur, you have the Justice and Equality Movement, led by, what do you call it, currently Dr. Jibril Ibrahim. whose brother was killed, who was the former leader, Khalil Ibrahim.
I see.
And you have Mini Minawi, Sudan Liberation Movement. You have Abdul Wahid Noor.
Sudan Liberation Front.
Yeah, and these are all, what do you call it, rebel group from Darfur.
Oh, interesting.
But what do you call it?
Abdulaziz Al-Hilu
is the leader of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement North. They were the northern allies of they were in alliance with the SPLM before South Sudan ceded. So when South Sudan was ceding, they were left in the north. And they control the Nuba Mountains.
Okay, so they are those who have allies in South Sudan.
They are allies in South Sudan.
So they are most likely American protected.
And then when it comes to the democratic, the civilian opposition, you have the Forces for Freedom of Change, which is a large umbrella. But the main force on the ground were the Sudan's Professional Association, more like a trade union of professional teachers, lawyers, doctors, and whatever. Okay. And then you have the youth activists, the Sudanese Resistance Committee. But these particular ones, who are the main actors on the ground.
Allah Salah, this lady.
She became the face of the protest.
I see.
But you see, in course of negotiating with the military to cede power, the whole international community with EU or whatever decided to sideline the resistance committee, despite the fact that they have strong influence on the ground because they were organizing the protest. And then they brought in some of these parties on board. And then Abdullah Hamdok was made the prime minister in a power sharing agreement. But when the Abraham Accord became an issue, with US wanting to normalize, all of a sudden, US started to weaken the civilian opposition. And by so doing, that emboldened the military. One, having taken the leverage you have, delisting them from the state list of terror, then the utility of the civilian ally in the government itself was not needed. So the coup was mounted. But then now, having captured power, the two of them have issues. The military wants RSF to be placed under their control. And then the Dagalo knows very well that will diminish his power.